Most people know the Second World War as a handful of dates and famous battles, but that's just the surface.
A backflash from a gun, which sometimes...
In May 1945, the most destructive war machine the world had ever seen came to an abrupt halt. After nearly 6 years of global conflict, Nazi Germany surrendered, leaving behind not only shattered cities and millions of casualties, but also an arsenal unlike anything history had ever witnessed. Across Germany and occupied Europe lay millions of rifles, machine guns, artillery pieces, tanks, aircraft, submarines, rockets, ammunition depots, secret laboratories, and underground factories. Enough military hardware to equip entire armies for years. For the victorious Allies, this wasn't simply the spoils of war. It was a problem of unprecedented scale. Should it all be destroyed, studied, reused, or hidden away before it could fuel another conflict? The answers would shape the Cold War, influence military technology for generations, and send weapons built for Hitler's army into battlefields. So, what really happened to Germany's captured weapons after the Second World War? The day the Third Reich fell. Before the guns finally fell silent in Europe, the Third Reich collapsed with astonishing speed. On May 7, 1945, at the French city of Reims, General Alfred Jodl signed Germany's unconditional surrender before Allied representatives, ending the war in Europe. At the insistence of the Soviet Union, the surrender was signed again in Berlin on May 8th, this time by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, before Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Allied commanders. Across Europe, church bells rang, crowds celebrated, and victory parades erupted. Yet, while millions rejoiced, Allied officers faced an entirely different reality. Scattered across a defeated continent lay the greatest military stockpile ever assembled by a modern nation, and nobody yet knew what to do with it. The sheer scale of what the Allies inherited was staggering. During 6 years of total war, Nazi Germany had transformed much of Europe into one enormous military workshop, hidden inside depots, railway tunnels, underground factories, forests, ports, and airfields where millions of Karabiner 98K rifles, MP-40 submachine guns, MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns, Panzerfaust anti-tank launchers, artillery batteries, armored vehicles, locomotives, ammunition dumps, aircraft, submarines, and mountains of spare parts. Thousands of factories that had once produced tanks, aircraft engines, rockets, optics, explosives, and ammunition were suddenly in Allied hands. Entire research centers devoted to jet propulsion, rocketry, radar, and advanced weapons survived the war. Much of this arsenal had never even reached the battlefield. Had it been the other way around, who knows how the war would have ended? But ended it had. And now, something had to be done with these weapons. As Germany's front lines collapsed in the spring of 1945, military commanders abandoned huge depots. Soviet troops advancing into Berlin found warehouses packed with rifles, machine guns, ammunition, and Panzerfausts intended for the city's desperate last stand. In Western Germany, the encirclement known as the Ruhr Pocket ended with the surrender of roughly 325,000 German troops in April 1945, leaving behind enormous quantities of tanks, trucks, artillery, and engineering equipment. In Czechoslovakia, factories belonging to Skoda Works and other manufacturers contained unfinished armored vehicles and ammunition awaiting delivery. In Norway and Denmark, where hundreds of thousands of German occupation troops remained until the surrender, coastal batteries, naval installations, submarines, and stockpiles of supplies passed almost overnight into Allied control. Austria, too, became littered with abandoned armored columns, mountain fortifications, and ammunition dumps. Not every weapon was surrendered so neatly. Throughout Germany's final weeks, soldiers received orders to destroy sensitive equipment before it could fall into enemy hands. Tanks were blown apart with demolition charges. Aircraft were burned on their own airfields, and artillery pieces were sabotaged. Countless rifles, pistols, and machine guns were thrown into rivers such as the Elbe and Danube, or dumped into lakes across Germany and Austria. Even larger quantities of ammunition and naval ordnance were deliberately scuttled into the Baltic Sea and North Sea after the war. Decades later, fishermen would continue hauling up unexploded shells, naval mines, and crates of German ammunition, while environmental experts still monitor thousands of tons of chemical munitions resting on the Baltic seabed. Yet another danger remained hidden underground. Even as Berlin fell, senior Nazi officials promoted plans for a guerrilla campaign known as Operation Werewolf. Although the organization never developed into the large-scale resistance movement Nazi propagandists envisioned, the SS and Wehrmacht nevertheless established hidden arms caches throughout Germany and occupied territories. Buried beneath forests, concealed inside abandoned bunkers, or hidden behind false walls, these secret stores contained rifles, explosives, radios, ammunition, food, and forged documents intended for future use. Allied occupation forces launched extensive searches throughout 1945 and 1946, uncovering hundreds of concealed depots. Even today, construction workers in Germany, Poland, Austria, and the Czech Republic occasionally discover forgotten wartime caches that remained untouched for more than 80 years. For Allied commanders, victory created an enormous logistical nightmare. Simply counting the captured equipment became a colossal undertaking. Every rifle, tank, artillery piece, aircraft, and vehicle had to be catalogued, secured, transported, or destroyed before it disappeared onto the black market or into the hands of potential insurgents. Military intelligence officers wanted to examine Germany's technological achievements. Engineers wanted to dismantle advanced aircraft and rockets. Politicians wanted Germany permanently disarmed. Occupation authorities worried that former Nazi loyalists might recover hidden weapons and launch attacks against Allied forces. So, what did they do with these captured weapons? We'll get to that shortly. But let's just see what was happening years earlier, while the Second World War was still raging. When Hitler's weapons fought against Hitler. From the very beginning of the war, the Wehrmacht showed little hesitation in turning enemy weapons against their former owners. Germany's lightning victories between 1938 and 1941 handed it vast quantities of usable military hardware, and rather than letting it rust away in depots, German planners eagerly folded it into their own order of battle. It was a practical decision born of necessity. Even before launching its invasion of the Soviet Union, Germany's industry struggled to meet the enormous demands of a global war, making captured equipment too valuable to ignore. Some of the Wehrmacht's most important early tanks were not even German. After occupying Czechoslovakia in March 1939, Germany inherited the highly regarded Czech LTVs 35 and LTVs 38 light tanks. Redesignated as the Panzerkampfwagen 35T and 38T, the T standing for Czechish or Czech, they became indispensable during the invasions of Poland in 1939, France in 1940, and the opening stages of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941. At one point, nearly a quarter of Germany's tank force invading the Soviet Union consisted of Czech-built vehicles. The reliable Panzer 38T in particular proved so successful that its chassis later served as the basis for the Jagdpanzer 38, better known as the Hetzer tank destroyer. The fall of France in June 1940 expanded Germany's arsenal even further. Thousands of French vehicles were captured almost intact. These included Char B-1 heavy tanks, Somua S-35 cavalry tanks, Renault R-35 light tanks, armored cars, trucks, artillery tractors, and countless support vehicles. Rather than scrap them, Germany assigned many to occupation duties, anti-partisan operations, and even frontline service. Others were converted into self-propelled artillery, flamethrower tanks, ammunition carriers, or armored recovery vehicles. When Germany later fortified the Atlantic Wall against an expected Allied invasion, many of the mobile artillery platforms defending the French coastline were, ironically, converted French vehicles now wearing German crosses. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 produced another unexpected source of equipment. During the rapid German advance, enormous numbers of Soviet vehicles were abandoned, damaged, or captured. Among the most prized were the T-34 medium tank and the KV-1 heavy tank, both of which impressed German commanders with their armor and firepower. Repaired T-34s entered German service under the designation Panzerkampfwagen T-34-747R, while captured KV-1s were similarly reused after modifications. German workshops repainted them with large Balkenkreuz markings to reduce friendly fire incidents. Captured Soviet PPSH-41 submachine guns also became surprisingly popular among German infantry, with some even converted to fire the standard German 9mm Parabellum cartridge. But beginning in 1943, the tide turned dramatically. Two could play at that game. The catastrophic German surrender at Stalingrad in February 1943 marked the first major reversal. Nearly 300,000 Axis troops had entered the battle, and after the encirclement, the Red Army captured enormous quantities of German weapons, vehicles, ammunition, and supplies. Months later, the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, left another vast battlefield littered with disabled Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, Stu-G3 assault guns, and even the new Panther tanks. Then came Operation Bagration in the summer of 1944, when the Soviet offensive annihilated Germany's Army Group Center, destroying or capturing thousands more vehicles as the Wehrmacht retreated westward in disarray. Unlike the Western Allies, who generally viewed captured German equipment as intelligence assets, the Red Army often returned it to combat almost immediately. Soviet repair workshops salvaged damaged Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, replacing missing parts wherever possible, and repainting them with prominent red stars. Stu-G3 assault guns also found new operators. The most remarkable adaptation, however, became the Su-76I. Between early and late 1943, Soviet factories converted roughly 200 captured Panzer III tanks and Stu-G3 chassis into self-propelled guns armed with Soviet 76.2mm weapons. Captured German equipment also proved valuable beyond raw firepower. Soviet reconnaissance units occasionally employed intact German tanks during deception operations, approaching enemy positions before opening fire at close range. Crews covered the vehicles with oversized Soviet stars and tactical markings to reduce the risk of attack from friendly aircraft and artillery, though operating behind enemy lines remained extraordinarily dangerous. German MP-40 submachine guns and MG-34 machine guns also appeared in Soviet hands, especially among reconnaissance units and partisan formations that could easily obtain captured German ammunition during offensives. The Western Allies generally had less reason to rely on enemy equipment because American and British industry consistently outproduced Germany. Even so, necessity sometimes overrode logistics. During the North African campaign in early 1941, after the Battle of Beta Fomme, the British 6th Royal Tank Regiment temporarily operated captured Italian 1340 medium tanks because replacements were unavailable. The experiment, unfortunately, proved short-lived. The tanks suffered from overheating, mechanical failures, and thin armor. Even later in the war, Allied curiosity persisted. In Italy, during October 1944, Canadian forces captured an intact Panther tank nicknamed Deserter, which underwent extensive mobility and technical testing. A few months later, during fighting around Overloon in the Netherlands, the British Coldstream Guards placed another abandoned Panther into service, naming it Cuckoo. Crews praised its thick frontal armor and excellent optics, though its complex mechanics made maintenance difficult. Across the Atlantic, other captured German vehicles, including Tigers, Panthers, and specialized armored vehicles, were shipped to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where American engineers dismantled, tested, and meticulously documented every innovation they could find. By the spring of 1945, the Allies had already spent years studying, repairing, and even fighting with German weapons. They had learned which designs worked, which failed, and which technologies offered glimpses of the future. So when Nazi Germany finally surrendered, and millions more rifles, tanks, aircraft, rockets, and machine guns suddenly became available, the question was no longer whether Hitler's arsenal had value. The real question was, who would control it? The greatest treasure hunt in history. The shooting war in Europe officially ended in May 1945, but almost immediately, another contest began. Germany was carved into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union under agreements reached at the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. On paper, the Allies remained partners. On the ground, however, each power rushed to seize anything that could provide a military or technological advantage before the others arrived. The targets were no longer cities or armies. They were rocket factories hidden inside mountains, airfields filled with experimental aircraft, naval bases housing revolutionary submarines, laboratories packed with classified research, and, above all, the scientists who understood how they all worked. The greatest treasure hunt in modern history had begun. No prize attracted more attention than Germany's rocket program. At the vast underground Mittelwerk factory near Nordhausen in central Germany, Allied troops uncovered one of the Third Reich's most ambitious secret projects. Built inside the Konstein Mountain and supplied by the nearby Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp, the complex had produced more than 5,700 V-2 ballistic rockets and thousands of V-1 flying bombs. The V-2, designed under the direction of Werner von Braun at the Army Research Center in Peenemünde, became the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. Capable of traveling over 320 kilometers, climbing beyond 80 kilometers in altitude, and striking London or Antwerp at supersonic speed, it was impossible to intercept with wartime technology. By the time American forces reached the site in April 1945, German technicians had already destroyed many documents, but hundreds of rocket components, blueprints, and partially completed missiles remained intact. The race extended far beyond rockets. Allied technical intelligence teams spread across Germany searching for every advanced weapon they could find. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter, demonstrated speeds exceeding 850 kilometers per hour. Nearby, engineers examined the Me 163 Comet, the only rocket-powered fighter ever deployed in combat, whose blistering climb rate came at the cost of dangerous fuel and a flight time measured in minutes. Even more mysterious was the Horten Ho 229 Flying Wing, a futuristic aircraft built largely from wood with a tailless design that later attracted attention because of its unusually low radar signature. While it never reached operational service, decades later, aviation historians and aerospace engineers would revisit its concepts when discussing stealth aircraft. Germany's naval innovations proved equally valuable. At ports such as Kiel and Hamburg, the Allies discovered the revolutionary Type 21 submarine, nicknamed the Electroboot. Unlike earlier U-boats that primarily operated on the surface, the Type 21 was designed to remain submerged for extended periods using high-capacity batteries and streamlined hull construction. It could reach underwater speeds of about 17 knots, faster than many contemporary submarines could achieve on the surface. Smaller but equally advanced was the Type 23 coastal submarine. Although fewer than 120 Type 21s were completed before Germany's surrender, and only a handful conducted combat patrols, naval architects from both East and West immediately recognized that these designs represented the future of submarine warfare. Their influence could later be seen in Soviet Whiskey-class submarines, American Guppy conversions, and virtually every modern submarine developed during the Cold War. The search also extended into technologies less visible. Carl Zeiss factories at Jena contained some of the world's finest military optics, including sniper scopes, tank sights, binoculars, and rangefinders that had given German forces a reputation for exceptional battlefield accuracy. Allied specialists also seized infrared night vision equipment, including the FG-1250 system fitted to Panther tanks and the experimental Zielgerät 1229 Vampire device used with the STG-44 assault rifle. German radar systems such as the Würzburg and Freya networks were dismantled and studied extensively, while captured documents on microwave technology, guided weapons, and electronic warfare found their way into laboratories across the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Perhaps the most valuable cargo, however, consisted of people rather than machines. In the closing weeks of the war, American intelligence launched Operation Paperclip, a secret program initially intended to prevent German scientific expertise from falling into Soviet hands. Eventually, more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were brought to the United States. The most famous among them was Werner von Braun, who surrendered to American forces in Bavaria along with key members of his rocket team.
Operation Paperclip. After World War II, the United States gathered up a ton of scientists from Nazi Germany, brought them over to America, and even Werner von Braun.
After assembling captured V-2 rockets at White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, beginning in 1946, the group helped transform wartime missile technology into the foundation of America's ballistic missile program. Von Braun later became the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket, whose 5 F-1 engines powered the Apollo missions, including Apollo 11's historic moon landing in July 1969. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union refused to be left behind. On the night of October the 21st, 1946, Soviet authorities launched Operation Osoavyakim, one of the largest forced transfers of technical expertise in history. Approximately 2,200 German specialists, accompanied by several thousand family members, were rounded up from the Soviet occupation zone and transported by train to research institutes across the USSR. At the same time, entire factories, machine tools, laboratories, and production lines were dismantled and shipped east. German specialists contributed to Soviet missile development under Sergei Korolev, helped improve turbojet engines, optical systems, and precision manufacturing, and accelerated projects that might otherwise have taken years longer. Both superpowers were effectively rebuilding portions of Germany's scientific infrastructure inside their own borders. One subject particularly haunted Allied planners: the possibility that Germany had come close to building an atomic bomb. The German nuclear research effort, known as the Uranverein or Uranium Club, had attracted distinguished physicists, including Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, and Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker. Although intelligence agencies feared the Nazis might have developed nuclear weapons first, post-war investigations revealed a far less advanced program. The project suffered from fragmented leadership, inadequate industrial support, shortages of uranium and heavy water, and strategic decisions that prioritized other weapons. During Operation Alsos, Allied teams seized laboratories, confiscated uranium stocks, and detained leading German nuclear scientists before the Soviets could reach them. Their internment at Farm Hall in England famously confirmed that they had been surprised by the American atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By 1947, the facade of Allied unity had largely disappeared. Former wartime partners were competing for Germany's technology. What happened to millions of German weapons? When the race for Germany's secret technology began to slow, Allied authorities confronted an even larger challenge: what to do with the ordinary weapons. Unlike experimental rockets or jet fighters, these were not counted in dozens, but in the millions. Across occupied Germany, military depots overflowed with Karabiner 98K rifles, MP-40 submachine guns, MG-34, and MG-42 machine guns, Panzerfaust anti-tank launchers, artillery pieces, armored vehicles, trucks, ammunition, and spare parts. The Allied Control Council, established after Germany's surrender, oversaw the massive effort to disarm the former Wehrmacht. American, British, French, and Soviet occupation authorities established collection points where surrendered German units delivered their weapons. Engineers, ordnance specialists, and intelligence officers inspected everything from pistols to heavy artillery. Equipment was broadly sorted into 3 categories: items with immediate military value that could be reused, equipment with research or intelligence value worthy of detailed study, and material considered obsolete or uneconomical that would be scrapped. The process extended well beyond Germany itself. Similar collection programs took place in Austria, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Norway, and other territories where German forces surrendered with enormous quantities of equipment still intact. Much of the captured arsenal never survived the decade. Throughout the late 1940s, Europe witnessed vast demilitarization campaigns as mountains of rifles, machine guns, artillery pieces, helmets, and vehicles were cut apart and melted down for steel. Destroying ammunition proved even more dangerous. Millions of shells, bombs, mines, grenades, and rockets remained unstable after years of storage or combat. Specialized disposal teams worked around the clock, dismantling explosives, conducting controlled detonations, or transporting dangerous stockpiles away from populated areas. Fatal accidents were common. In occupied Germany alone, explosive ordnance disposal became a permanent military responsibility. Not everything could safely be dismantled on land. Faced with overwhelming quantities of chemical weapons, naval mines, artillery shells, bombs, and surplus ammunition, Allied governments adopted what seemed like the quickest solution: dump them into the sea. Between the late 1940s and early 1950s, hundreds of thousands of tons of German munitions were deliberately scuttled in designated disposal areas across the Baltic Sea, North Sea, and parts of the Atlantic Ocean. Some of these dumps included chemical agents, such as mustard gas and Tabun nerve agent, both developed or stockpiled by Nazi Germany. At the time, little attention was paid to long-term environmental consequences. Yet even while millions of weapons disappeared into furnaces and oceans, thousands of others were carefully preserved. Intelligence agencies considered German equipment an invaluable classroom. Captured Panther and Tiger tanks underwent exhaustive firing trials.
So today we're going to be talking about the MG42, the World War II German MG42 machine gun. Fired 1,200 rounds a minute.
MG42 machine guns impressed nearly every army that tested them with their remarkable cyclic rate of around 1,200 rounds per minute. German optical sights, rangefinders, artillery instruments, and communications equipment became standard reference material for military engineers studying future designs. At proving grounds such as Aberdeen in the United States and Bovington in Britain, technicians dismantled German vehicles bolt by bolt, documenting strengths and weaknesses that would influence post-war armored warfare. Then, the international situation changed almost overnight. As relations between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union deteriorated, yesterday's enemy suddenly became tomorrow's ally. In May 1955, the Federal Republic of Germany joined NATO, ending a decade of formal disarmament. Later that year, the Bundeswehr was established, marking West Germany's return as an armed nation. Ironically, many of the officers tasked with building the new force had previously served in the Wehrmacht, including former generals such as Adolf Heusinger, who would later become NATO's chairman of the military committee. Although West Germany rapidly adopted American equipment such as the M47 and M48 Patton tanks, captured German small arms and support equipment continued to serve during the transition. East Germany followed a different path. In 1955, the Soviet-backed government organized the Kasernierte Volkspolizei into what became the National Volksarmee, or National People's Army, in 1956. Unlike the Bundeswehr, the NVA relied heavily on Soviet doctrine and Warsaw Pact equipment, but enormous German stockpiles remained under Soviet control for years. Captured Wehrmacht depots supplied occupation forces, training establishments, and allied communist states, while Soviet authorities gradually replaced German weapons with newer Soviet designs. Several European countries continued operating German equipment long after the war ended. France, having captured substantial numbers of Panther tanks in 1945, placed them into service with armored units and reportedly retained some until around 1949 while rebuilding its own armored forces. Norway inherited German coastal defenses, artillery and small arms left behind by approximately 350,000 occupying troops. Czechoslovakia not only retained captured German weapons, but also resumed production of several German designs in its own factories. Yugoslavia, under Josip Broz Tito, incorporated large numbers of captured German rifles, machine guns, vehicles, and artillery into the Yugoslav People's Army, while domestic arms production recovered. But that was not all. The German weapons also saw action outside Europe after the disastrous war. Hitler's arsenal found a second life. Far from the heart of Berlin, the State of Israel declared independence on May 14, 1948. It then faced invasion from neighboring Arab states while suffering from a desperate shortage of arms. The breakthrough came from Czechoslovakia. Under the secret arms agreements known as Operation Balak, Prague supplied Israel with approximately 25,000 Mauser rifles, thousands of MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns, millions of rounds of ammunition, and dozens of Avia S-199 fighter aircraft. The S-199 was an awkward but effective derivative of the Messerschmitt Bf-109, assembled from leftover German airframes and components after the war. Israeli pilots nicknamed it the Mule because of its difficult handling. Yet, despite its shortcomings, these aircraft played a crucial role in slowing Egyptian advances during the conflict. Ironically, some of the first combat aircraft defending the Jewish state were direct descendants of Hitler's own Luftwaffe fighters. The battlefield was equally paradoxical on the Arab side. Egypt, Syria, and other Arab armies also fielded former German equipment acquired through wartime surplus, captured stocks, and post-war European arms dealers. German-designed Mauser rifles remained common infantry weapons, while MG-34 machine guns appeared in several Arab armies well into the 1950s and beyond. Far to the east, when the Korean War erupted in June 1950, German weapons surfaced once again. North Korea and later the Chinese People's Volunteer Forces received weapons originating from Soviet-controlled German stockpiles, including MG-34 machine guns and Mauser rifles that had been captured by the Red Army in 1945. Although Soviet-made PPSH-41 submachine guns and SKS carbines gradually became more common, German equipment continued to appear during the conflict, particularly in its early stages. Even more significant was the invisible legacy of German technology. Soviet engineers had incorporated lessons from captured German aerodynamics, swept-wing research, and jet development into aircraft such as the MiG-15. On the Western side, American engineers had likewise spent years studying the Messerschmitt Me-262 and other captured aircraft. While the MiG-15 was powered by the British-designed Rolls-Royce Nen engine, copied by the Soviets as the Klimov Fk-1, both sides entered the First Great Jet War, carrying pieces of German research into the skies over Korea. Southeast Asia became the next destination for Hitler's arsenal. During the First Indochina War, which lasted from 1946 to 1954, the Viet Minh acquired German small arms captured by Soviet forces and redistributed through communist supply networks. After Vietnam was divided in 1954, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army continued receiving Soviet, Chinese, and Eastern Bloc equipment, including refurbished MG-34 machine guns, KAR-98K rifles, and other surplus German weapons used by reserve and militia units. Then there was the Six-Day War in June 1967. On the Golan Heights, Israeli forces encountered Syrian Panzer IV tanks and Stu-G3 assault guns originally built for the Wehrmacht more than 2 decades earlier. Acquired from France and Czechoslovakia during the 1950s, some had been upgraded with Soviet machine guns and French radios. They were badly outmatched by Israel's Centurion and M48 Patton tanks, but their presence demonstrated just how far the Third Reich's arsenal had traveled. German weapons also surfaced across Africa as European colonial empires collapsed. During the Algerian War, from 1954 to 1962, both French forces and the National Liberation Front used German small arms. In the Portuguese colonial war, from 1961 to 1974, guerrillas in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau carried KAR-98K rifles and MG-34 machine guns alongside Soviet and Chinese weapons. After Angola's independence in 1975, the ensuing civil war drew in Cuba, South Africa, the Soviet Union, and the United States. German firearms saw action once again. Ethiopia likewise retained Mauser rifles in reserve service during the 1960s and 70s. The pattern extended into Latin America. After the Cuban Revolution in 1959, surplus Mauser rifles entered Cuban arsenals before Soviet deliveries became dominant. During Nicaragua's Sandinista Revolution and the Contra War of the 1980s, Mauser rifles and MG-34 machine guns resurfaced. In neighboring El Salvador's Civil War, from 1979 to 1992, both government forces and insurgents fielded German designs alongside American M16s, Soviet AK pattern rifles, Belgian FALs, and Israeli Galils. But a lot of other weapons found a second life in quite another way. American soldiers legally mailed home bring-back souvenirs such as Luger P-8s, Walther P-38s, daggers, helmets, and Nazi flags, while countless others disappeared into Europe's post-war black market. Surviving German tanks, aircraft, and firearms also entered museums such as the Tank Museum, Musée des Blindés, Patriot Park, and the Imperial War Museums, while rare Nazi-era artifacts became highly prized collector's items despite legal restrictions in countries including Germany and France. Germany's military legacy also lived on through technology. The MG42 evolved into the MG3, Mauser designs continued influencing modern firearms, the Type 21 transformed submarine development, and V2 research contributed to the Saturn V moon rocket. Today, more than 80 years after the Third Reich fell, pieces of Hitler's arsenal are still being unearthed beneath forests, cities, and the ocean floor. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.